Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Pranam, dear devotees. Welcome to Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. Today we are very happy to have the association of His Grace Venugopal Prabhu.
May I begin?
So, can you hear me, Prabhu?
Now I can hear.
Yeah. So, Dandot Pranam, welcome to everyone. Today we are very happy to have the association of His Grace Venugopal Prabhuji. He'll be sharing Bhagavad Gita from 4th Canto, 26th chapter, verses 12 and 13. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, please start.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. So, good morning, Swagatam everybody. Another week of Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. So, we'll start with the Mangalacharan prayers. Om Ajnana Timram Dasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Na Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shrivasadi Gauravaktaranda Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Narayanam Namaskrityam Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayam Mudiraye Nashta Prayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavate Uttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtaki Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangum Langayate Girim Yatkripa Tamaham Vande Shri Guru Dinatarinam Paramananda Madhavam Shri Chaitanya Ishwaram Om Tatsat. Hare Krishna, dear devotees, welcome again to today's Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Sangha. Please accept my humble obeisances. Vancha kalpataru vesha kripa sindhu vyayavacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. So I thank the outset the organizers of this Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya program for giving me this opportunity to delve a little deeper in Srimad Bhagavatam for my own purification. I seek blessings. I see many devotees already gathered. I seek the blessings of all the assembled Vaishnavas so that I can speak within my realization for the pleasure of Guru and Krishna. So with that, I wanted to just begin the verse for today. I just shared my screen. So is it possible to give me sharing rights?
Yeah, forgot about it. Sorry. Yes, bro, you can do it now.
Okay. So today's verse, we are in Canto 4, Chapter 26. King Puranjana goes to the forest to hunt and his queen becomes angry. So this is the chapter, and we are verses for today 12 and 13. So I will read the verses and translation and purport, and we'll discuss. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. The verse for today, verse 12. Atmanam arhayam chakre dhupalepa shragadibihi sadavalankrita sarvango mahishyamādadhe manaha. Word for word meaning Atmanam himself, arhayam as it ought to be done, chakre did, dhupa incense, alepa smearing the body with sandalwood pulp, shrak garlands, adibihi beginning with, sadhu saintly beautiful, alankrita being decorated, sarva anga all over the body, mahishyam unto the queen, adade he gave, manaha mind. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, Jai Srila Prabhupada. After this, King Puranjana decorated his body with suitable ornaments. He also smeared scented sandalwood pulp over his body and put on flower garlands. In this way, he became completely refreshed. After this, he began to search out his queen. So, purport, when a man comes into good consciousness and accepts a saintly person as a spiritual master, he hears many Vedic instructions in the form of philosophy, stories, narrations about great devotees, and transactions between God and his devotees. In this way, a man becomes refreshed in mind exactly like a person who smears scented sandalwood pulp all over his body and decorates himself with ornaments. These decorations may be compared to knowledge of religion and the self. Through such knowledge, one becomes detached from a materialistic way of life and engages himself in always hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other Vedic literatures. The word Sadhava Alankrita used in this verse indicates that one must be absorbed in knowledge gathered from the instructions of saintly persons. Just as King Puranjana began to search out his better half, the queen, one who is decorated with knowledge and instructions from saintly persons, should try to search out his original consciousness, Krishna consciousness. One cannot return to Krishna consciousness unless he is favored by the instructions of a saintly person. Therefore, Srila Narottam Das Thakura sings, Sadhu Shastra Guru Vakya Chittete Kariya Aikya. If we want to become saintly persons, or if we want to return to our original Krishna consciousness, we must associate with sadhu, saintly person, shastra, authoritative Vedic literature, and guru, a bona fide spiritual master. So this is the process. We have another verse. We'll discuss this and then we will go to that verse. So just some background. I know we are all regular attendees and we are in sync with where we are. Just so to set some context, if anybody is joining in between. So we are discussing after the Prachetas received mercy of Lord Shiva, then Narad Muni is compassionate on the parents of the Prachetas, particularly his father, their father, King Prachinavari, and he comes to give his mercy to him. He notices that while the sons, Prajetas, have got fixed up on the path of pure devotional service, the father is engaged in a lot of, engrossed in the sacrifices and the animal sacrifices and these type of activities, and not he has not got access to devotional service like their children. So this is where we see also in our ISKCON also many times children come into Krishna consciousness earlier, and many devotees, when the parents of the children get association of devotees, the devotees again, those who are very good in like Narad Muni in giving Krishna consciousness, they out of their compassion they are able to reach out and bring them also into the practice of Krishna consciousness. So here Narad Muni is doing something similar. Here he does that in many places, goes and gives his mercy, and here he is doing that because King Prachina Barishat is so engrossed in all those performing these sacrifices and these type of activities for in his day-to-day life. He needs to be more materialistic activities. And he couldn't receive the instructions of pure devotional service immediately. So Narad Muni employs the technique of narrating an allegory of King Puranjana. And we see even in our lives when we started hearing about spiritual topics, we always, whatever stories from this Shastras we have heard, is told, spoken, we invariably we place ourselves in the story and try to somebody who has that interest in hearing and contemplating. Eventually, the process is so beautiful that one begins to contemplate and place himself or herself in that stories, and tries to understand the lessons. So that is what happening here. And King Puranjana is nothing but none other than the individual soul, and it's an instruction for all of us. And I am sure that it's been my experience whenever I read this, also through this series in the Nityam Bhagavad Sevaya, we are placing ourselves repeatedly. We're getting an opportunity to contemplate on the life of King Puranjana, and how we need to mold our lives based on the instructions from the purports of Prabhupada, and of course Narad Muni to King Prachina Bari. So coming to today's verse, here after explaining about the city of 9 gates and kind of what we hear and Sankhya philosophy in the early chapters of Bhagavad Gita, when we do Bhagavad Gita sessions, we attend, like that we got some context of, and now what is happening is the king leaves the company of his wife. Wife is compared to like dharmic intelligence, and it is advised always to engage in any activities along with the wife, in terms of as one's dharmic activities, and doing things independent or is not advised. And that is what one of the lessons that is coming out from this chapter is, because King Puranjana leaves his wife and goes hunting. Again, some activity done independent of, without done with the guidance of dharmic intelligence, which is symbolized by the wife. So when one loses the intelligence and engages in some activity, that is the allegorical connection. So if you see here, what has happened is he has gone to the forest. He has mercilessly killed a lot of animals in that kind of in that mood of degraded intelligence. And now, after all that, he has returned, and he previously saw he takes a bath, and now he's refreshing himself, decorating his body and smearing his body with sandalwood pulp and putting on flower garlands. In this way, he becomes refreshed. Now, after this, he begins to search out his queen. Again, for me, when I was reading this, it was I had to understand this a little more carefully. And externally, it is depicting any materialistic person's uh, routine, like go out into the material world uh, um, with under the modes, do a lot of activities under the influence of the modes, and get fatigued by the material nature, and then return back home, and then try to recuperate, and then again repeating that cycle day after day, week after year. So that is, in a way, we can relate to that, as that's how the world around is going. And we also need to introspect how different is our life, and how we need to be cautious in not falling into the material trap. So here what has happened is, like, we'll just go understand the purport. Prabhupada, interestingly, although that is the externally, it appears like that, Prabhupada is trying to help us understand deeper. Like, after this, he began to search out his queen. And we heard earlier, queen represents the dharmic intelligence. So what happens is, after when a man comes into good consciousness, so this is the beauty of Prabhupada's purports. If we just go a little, spend a little more time, so many things come out. What happens is, when a man comes into good consciousness, this happens in various ways. And like, sometimes through repeated getting bashed by material nature, bashed by Maya, or through good association, through some spiritual credits, one comes into good consciousness again, and accepts a saintly person as a spiritual master. So this is what Prabhupada is mentioning, that coming into good consciousness, followed by accepting a saintly person as a spiritual master, leads to one, hearing with faith the instructions from the Vedic literatures, again in the form of philosophy, stories, narrations. So all these we can relate in our own lives. Like, some point we came, how we came to good consciousness first, and then, of course, understanding what is Krishna consciousness. So now accepts a saintly person as a spiritual master. So that this is important in our lives also, and when we are reaching out to others, we see this happening always, and that it's not necessarily here spiritual master is what we know as an institution, as accepting diksha from a guru. But in the initial stages, it may not necessarily be that person from whom you accept diksha. Of course, if in many cases that is also the case, because we see all the initiating spiritual masters within our institution, that is called, they are always on the field, preaching actively day after day, and there is so much opportunity they're creating for people to come into saintly association, and become fortunate that way, and come into good consciousness, so that they can begin inquiring on the higher aspects of life. So, like, we see the Vedanta Sutra begins by saying Athato Brahma Jignasa. So we have this, Prabhupada repeatedly quotes this, the sutra from the Vedanta Sutra, the initial one. So it says Athato. So now that you have achieved this human form of life, what next? You need to do Brahma Jignasa, inquire into the purpose, inquire into the absolute truth. And in that process, it includes understanding the self, understanding relationship with the self and the absolute truth, and how to act in that relationship. So that's what our a spiritual master does. But that is, and this spiritual master could be for us anybody who we first meet or who we get a little bit of faith in to hear from. So, like we see, expert preachers, they of course they have a lot of compassion, and from that only, this they are able to reach out to many souls and bring them to good consciousness first. And what that means is that consciousness in which they are ready to hear. So this is what is very important as preachers. Like we need to bring people to a consciousness where they are ready to hear. There's so many hurdles we see in preaching. And here Prabhupada is saying, when a man comes into good consciousness and accepts saintly person, so we need to endeavor, focus our endeavors to somehow get people to achieve this consciousness, followed by regular hearing from the scriptures. So then that person is the saintly person that Prabhupada is referring to here. It might not necessarily be the institutional, how we understand the guru. It could be an individual, anybody who is eager to share this knowledge with others. So with that, what happens when that hearing begins? We see this very often in all expert preachers from any level. Like you see those who are going to the colleges or just on the streets to one-on-one with people or corporates or all bhakti rikshas at home. All we see, these are what they achieve is they achieve that they manage to get people to put a little bit of faith. That adho shraddha that we hear as a first step of in practicing devotional service, getting that a minimum soft faith. Because always people are very reluctant to put faith. Although for materialistic activities, they easily put their faith because they are driven by the material nature and their base nature. But for higher purposes, like elevating themselves spiritually, putting faith is big challenge. And here Prabhupada says that's why unless one is favored by instructions of a saintly person, that does not that faith does not arise. So these were some things in the initial part of the purport. So Prabhupada mentions, as one puts faith and begins hearing from all the literatures, from narrations about great devotees, their transactions between God and his devotees. In this way, one becomes refreshed in mind, exactly like a person who smears scented sandalwood pulp all over his body and decorates himself with ornaments. Again, this is a whole new dimension for a materialistic person. Becoming refreshed in mind sometimes is just in the today's times, because we always say Western, but because we are also influenced so much by Western, it no longer is just a Western issue. Like all those materialistic ideas are very much penetrating even Indian society at a rapid pace. So I think we need to recognize that and understand these things are relevant for everybody. So what I wanted to say is when this aspect of being refreshed in mind, those who have traveled to particularly Europe and all, I've heard, I have not, but that there is a different idea of becoming fresh. We have minimum taking bath, becoming pure, cleaning ourselves and these type of things. but their way of refreshing is just putting some perfume, and it's not taking bath is a luxury, and some of them are unfortunate they cannot take bath as we go higher and higher in the I think in the globe, not that longitude, I guess. And particularly in Europe and Scandinavian countries, weekly bath is normal. And I heard in Russia they used to have bath centers. So once in a while people go and have bath. So they didn't need bathrooms in every home. So it was very surprising for me. But these are and these are the state of affairs in the world, and but that is not what is really refreshes the mind. But refreshing the mind, here Prabhupada says, is through all this hearing from the scriptures. That is what really refreshes the mind. So and then one gets decorated. So it's not the external, like just be getting up. I think it's mentioned in the scriptures that there will be a time soon where anybody who just takes bath is considered clean. Is ready to go out to the world. Again, our scriptures raise the bar very high, because it's not just taking bath, but one needs to decorate themselves through these, through hearing Vedic instructions, through all these activities, spiritual activities that elevate their consciousness. Not just the body is fresh, the mind is also fresh, and the consciousness is elevated. That is really what is a meaning of getting fresh. So, so these decorations may be compared to knowledge of religion and the self. So when one is equipped with the knowledge of the self and religion. So again, religion sometimes often is in today's times is not a very good thing to mention, because the religion is started getting associated with a lot of negative acts in the name of religion. But really here, like Prabhupada says, knowledge, religion without philosophy is sentiment, and philosophy without just dry philosophy without religion is also not, what is it? It's mental speculation. So here Prabhupada says knowledge of religion and the self, both are important. So when that is there, one is really decorated. So when, and here Prabhupada is encouraging one to get decorated with that, and not really the materially decorated. But these, when one is decorated, through such knowledge, one becomes detached from a materialistic way of life, engages himself in always hearing. So this, when one decorates oneself this way, then one is inclined to engage more and more in hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam, Bhagavad Gita, and other literatures like we hear from Ramayana, Mahabharata, other Puranas and Upanishads. So, so that's what here Prabhupada is trying to explain, that these are all sadhu alankrita. So the sadhu alankrita is like that they are the alankrita means like decorations. So the decorations of a sadhu. So when one is absorbed in knowledge gathered from instructions of saintly persons, then one gets decorated. So just like that, here, what happens here, if you want to relate to Puranjana, and then so I understood, just as King Puranjana began to search out his better half. So one here, after kind of falling away, King Puranjana gets refreshed and again begins to inquire about his, search out his, engages the intelligence. So that is, he begins to search out his queen. So Prabhupada is trying to draw a connection here between that act of Puranjana to one's individual jiva search out for his original consciousness or Krishna consciousness. So one cannot return to Krishna consciousness unless he is favored by instructions of saintly person. So this we hear regularly, and how even Chaitanya Mahaprabhu quotes this that otherwise, like Brahmanda Brahmite Kona Bhagyavan Ji Guru Krishna Prasade Pai Bhakti Lata Bij. So when one receives Guru and Krishna's mercy, and this Guru comes in the form of initially some devotee saintly person who introduces you one to Krishna consciousness. Otherwise, one is Brahmanda Brahmite, like going around in this cycle of birth and death, not knowing the goal of a higher goal of getting out of this cycle, and always thinking executing activities in this cycle in a more refined way is the real goal. So that is the Brahme of the Jiva, and that's what we see. Everybody is just trying to be, even those who are so-called good people, are trying to do their duties, all their material duties nicely, because they don't know of the higher goals. And that higher goal is possible to understand only by association with the saintly person. So that again brings us to like the main purpose of ISKCON is to reach out, the outreach activity. We say preaching. Sometimes today's times, that's not really a nice word to hear from many people. They don't like to be preached. So of course, with the time, the connotations of words change. But in Prabhupada's time, it was considered a nice, positive engagement, raising one to a higher level. So, but we adapt with times. We see outreach. Now, outreach is when we out of compassion, one has that is developed after receiving something higher, one develops compassion to go and give it out to others. So that is what is one of the main purpose of ISKCON we see, and that is being achieved through by the institution of on a regular basis, day after day. So creating good fortune in people, because only through that one can, as I said, come out of that cycle of being, of birth and death, and understanding there is a higher goal of coming out, and not just coming out, but understanding the self and Krishna, and really developing that relationship, receiving that higher taste of serving Guru, Krishna, and sadhus in a loving way. So that's what Prabhupada mentions here, that he quotes Narottam Das Thakur, Sadhu Shastru Guru Vakya Chittete Kariyakya. So we also hear this often, that we need, there is this tripod of Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. One always needs to evaluate any aspect through these three kind of these three legs of the tripod. Sadhu, the saintly person's words and their activities. Shastra, the words of the Vedic literature, and of course Guru, the bona fide spiritual master, to one who has surrendered to get surrendered their mind and intelligence, the self, to receive instructions to make progress. So that all three needs to be looked at on a regular basis. This is the practice of when we practice devotional service. We don't have to separately think like how in any decision making we say, okay, let us apply this framework let us apply this decision making framework. It's not like it becomes second nature as we are practicing devotional service in the association of devotees, because these three things will always keep recurring, and subconsciously we would evaluate any aspect of whatever life situation comes. We will develop that intelligence and habit of seeing that situation through these three eyes of sadhu, shastra, and guru. And that's what Prabhupada says. This is the process. So process. Now we see how when in our day-to-day life, in any aspects of organization, that process is very important. We keep hearing. We also say there's no process. That's why everything is like this. So even here, Prabhupada uses the word process. So and we are so fortunate. There is a clear process in executing, like in this practice of elevating ourselves spiritually. And it's not some random things that happen. Sometimes it may appear random externally, but over time, through consistent practice, we can start seeing a method in that randomness or madness. So, and then we see how the process works wonderfully. And when I say the process, of course, the process of connecting one to connecting to a saintly person, then taking the next step of putting some faith in that person's words, and taking some small steps that the person advises. Like say we see preachers, they say, okay, take a book, start reading, because reading Prabhupada's books is again associating with a saintly person. Although physically he is not present, but Prabhupada says, I'm always present in my books. So when one receives a book, he receives association of a saintly person, and then that elevates one's consciousness and can bring one to the next steps of steps where they put more and more faith and receive more and more benefit from the process. So we see the process it begins like we have heard Adavshrata, Tata Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivritti, Nishta, Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, and Prema. So these are the stages. I think in Nectar of Devotion, it is more elaborately mentioned. So that is the process that is given to us by Srila Prabhupada and the Acharyas. And we need to one feel gratitude that we don't have to worry about there is no process and all these the ill effects of lack of process in any in any system, and that is a big relief, because we just once there is process, the next step of course there is we need to act, and but many times we see when there is no process, even when we act, we feel disoriented, because we know it is just randomly we are doing something and there is no method. We're not able to see. So that's why in anything, if there is a process, it's so much advantageous. So it is also the same even in devotional service. So those are some things I wanted to mention. Again, here the next verse. We'll go to the next verse. We have 10 minutes. It's a continuation here. Just read out the verse translation. Truptorishta sudruptascha kandarpa krishta manasaha navyachasta vararoham grihinim grihamedinim. Translation: after taking his dinner and having his thirst and hunger satisfied, King Puranjana felt some joy within his heart. Instead of being elevated to higher consciousness, he became captivated by Cupid and was moved by a desire to find his wife, who kept him satisfied in his household life. A purport by Srila Prabhupada. This verse is very significant for those desiring to elevate themselves to a higher level of Krishna consciousness. When a person is initiated by spiritual master, he changes his habits and does not eat undesirable eatables or engage in the eating of meat, drinking of liquor, illicit sex, or gambling. Satvika ahara. Foodstuffs in the mode of goodness are described in the Shastras as wheat, rice, vegetables, fruits, milk, sugar, and milk products. Simple food like rice, dal, chapatis, vegetables, milk, and sugar contribute a balanced diet. Sometimes it is found that an initiated person, in the name of prasad, eats very luxurious foodstuffs. Due to his past sinful life, he becomes attracted by Cupid, needs good food voraciously. It's clearly visible that when a neophyte in Krishna consciousness eats too much, he falls down. Instead of being elevated to pure Krishna consciousness, he becomes attracted by Cupid. The so-called brahmachari becomes agitated by woman, and Vanaprastha may again become captivated into having sex with his wife, or he may begin to search out another wife. Due to some sentiment, he may give up his wife and come into the association of devotees, the spiritual master. But due to his past sinful life, he cannot stay. Instead of being elevated to Krishna consciousness, he falls down, being attracted by Cupid and takes to another wife for sex enjoyment. The fall of the neophyte devotee from the path of Krishna consciousness down to the material life is described in Srimad Bhagavatam 1.5.17 by Narad Muni. त्यक्त्वा स्वधर्मां शरणाम्बुजं हरेर् भजन्न पक्को अथ पते ततो यदि यत्राक्ववा भद्रम् अभूत् अमुष्य किं को वार्तप्तो अभजतां स्वधर्मतः. This indicates that although a neophyte devotee may fall down from the path of Krishna consciousness due to his immaturity, his service to Krishna never goes in vain. However, a person who remains steadfast in his family duty or so-called social or family obligation, but does not take to Krishna consciousness, receives no profit. One who comes to Krishna consciousness must be very cautious and refrain from prohibited activity. As defined by Srila Rupa Goswami in his Upadeshamritam, Atyaharaha prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha laulyam cha sadbir bhaktiranashyati. Neophyte devotee should neither eat too much nor collect more money than necessary. Eating too much or collecting too much is called atyahara. For such atyahara, one must endeavor very much. This is called prayasa. Superficially, one may show himself to be very much faithful to the rules and regulations, but at the same time not be fixed in the regulative principles. This is called niyamagraha. By mixing with undesirable persons or janasanga, one becomes tainted with lust and greed and falls down from the path of devotional service. Hare Krishna. So here Prabhupada, again, if you see the translation, the verse, if you see, again, Puranjana, after taking his dinner and having his thirst and hunger satisfied, felt some joy within his heart. And instead of leveraging that for elevating oneself to higher consciousness, he became captivated by Cupid. He was moved by lower desire to find his wife, who kept him satisfied in his household life. When dissatisfied, when kept him bound by material life. So here, many things, again, Prabhupada, interestingly, in the purport, he just doesn't dwell on the verse itself, but he brings up the important point about food. So when so we always see the initial steps in progressing, we are told, is to modify, if not already we are having that practice, to modify our food intake, the dietary habits, so that we don't take anything that is unfavorable for our body and mind, so that we are equipped to inquire and practice the activities recommended in the scriptures in a better way. So Sattvika Ahara is mentioned here. Foods in the mode of goodness. So Prabhupada mentions that in Shastras, these items are considered good. So, but also he cautions that in the name of prasad, one should not eat very luxurious foodstuffs. So, because there is always, prasad is very sensitive topic always. So we know this because food is, if you see even it's a sustenance with one thing, but also it's a very very much sensitive to each individual. Each has their own kind of nature and preferences. But still, if we know that from follow the scriptures and restrict ourselves to sattvic food, and not just that, but with that sattvic food, we may get some sattvic benefits of sattvic food, but not if we don't leverage that to elevate our consciousness, then it's always we keep falling down, because we see many times, and this is many times all these diets they say is a fad, but really it's because one's inability to stick to that. And that's where when we have a process beyond just restricting diet, because we have the hearing process, and we have the whole 9 process of devotional service, where we are told why we are doing what we are doing repeatedly, and that's when we can whatever we are doing, we'll be able to sustain. So just thought of mentioning that. But here Prabhupada is cautioning us that we should not eat too much, because we have heard even Upadeshamrita, first verse, that the tongue, the belly, and the genitals are in a straight line internally. So as one compromises in the first step and the tongue, then it's a slippery slope. One easily gets compromised in the belly, and with the pushings of the belly and the tongue, one is gets compromised, and that we see here, one may begin to go beyond for base pleasures, sexual pleasures, beyond the framework of dharma. One gets forced to commit sinful activities. And this we see. It may seem very like it's a very important connection, like Ayurveda or yoga. Everybody understands this. But we need to, when we understand it, we will be able to caution ourselves and stop ourselves at the first gate of the tongue. If not, it is as I said, it's a slippery slope. So that's what Prabhupada is doing here. Says so-called brahmachari or even vanaprastha. So that's how serious it is if we don't take a precaution in eating in a balanced way. Because even a brahmachari can get agitated, or vanaprastha. And it may seem very gross, but this is reality. We are seeing when somebody is not able to stick to this basic step of the process, then they get compromised in their practice of devotion. But again, Prabhupada in his and the scriptures always, they don't depress us with all these things, but also they give us hope. But like he says, the fall of a devotee from path of Krishna consciousness is described in this verse. But there is also we hear that however, a person who remains steadfast in his family. Okay, sorry. What I wanted to say was the hope here is, despite such repeated fall downs, as we this phrase we hear particularly in ISKCON, basically we are like how when a baby is trying to crawl or walk, or we are learning to ride a bicycle, we keep falling. So Prabhupada always says, when one gets compromised in, like scriptures say this, we need to do this, and we fail and we fall down. So Prabhupada says, but we need to just get up and walk again, or try again. So that is what, and whatever efforts one has done earlier in practicing devotional service, they don't go in vain. So that is the hope and encouragement that Prabhupada and the Acharyas give us. That otherwise, what tendency is that, especially when we have come new and we have this perfectionist mindset, that okay, I got the perfect process, I got the perfect circumstance, situation, and I need to keep this perfection going. But again, we don't know. We are, Krishna teaches us through various ways that reveals our imperfections, and as that is revealed, we shouldn't fight it, but we should get humbled by that and get up and try again. So that is what the acharyas, the scriptures encourage us, and not get depressed by such statements that one falls down, like we see when we see, oh, what is this brahmachari, vanaprastha? But it applies to everybody. Everybody, one who's serious and thinks they are making progress and they fall down, it is depressing. But like we hear from many times senior devotees say, it's like a reset button. We just have to restart fresh and go forward. And we see in practically the process is like that. When we just stop dwelling on the fall down of through whatever compromises in our practice, and take just continue practicing, that's where bhakti, the glory of bhakti is that you start again, you get hope, you get the benefits, you start feeling the reciprocation, and you can move forward. So this is what I have heard from many senior devotees. So I just wanted to bring that aspect, because otherwise it seems it can be a depressing thought. Because food, tendency to compromise on food is often because we may, like when we are on Ekadashis, we see it's so easy because we have heard so much about the glories, or any other fasting days, and we are able to practice and with devotees, and we are able to do. And maybe the next day or other days, we may not be able to do so easily, and just gets compromised. So that is where we have these recurring opportunities, like fasting days, appearance days, and disappearance days of acharyas, festive, of the Supreme Lord, appearance days, and many opportunities to perform some austerities in the form of controlling our tongue, and then that can help us elevate ourselves and have a taste of that elevated state, so that even when we compromise, we want to get back there. So we are not dwelling on that the compromise, but we want to quickly get back there. So then we get again get back to the process. So that is what I have heard. Here again, Prabhupada is quoting famous Upadeshamrita, verse 2. Atyahara prayasascha prajalpo niyamagraha janasangascha laulyam cha sadbir bhaktir vinashyati. Again, eating too much or over endeavor, collecting too much. So these are the precautions here. Prabhupada is connecting this verse to the activity here of Puranjana. So another thing I wanted to bring out is, so in all these activities, when we see the regulative principles, here particularly we are talking about sattvic ahara, food. Like in our 4 regulative principles, we have that controlling the tongue as important, like no meat eating, no meat, fish and eggs is one of the principles. Then no intoxication. So both of them are related in some way to the controlling the tongue. And then we have no illicit sex, no gambling. But when the tongue is controlled, we see even in these regulative principles. So we heard often that these 4 principles are not like principles for practice. They are not devotional practices, but they are regulative principles of freedom. Means what makes one come to a platform of a human being. So we should not, like Prabhupada gave the process, 4 regulative principles, chanting minimum 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra Japa. So this we need to remind ourselves is like a baseline or a minimum standard that our founder Acharya, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada wanted us and for generations of ISKCON practitioners to have, so that from there he understands the current age. He has seen the most degraded side of current age, like in the West. So he knows, and the rest of the world follows those, and so he knows in time, rest of the world also will have the same challenges. So we hear like Prabhupada has given the process for for the next generations to come. So we see how minimum standards Prabhupada has set, but we should not think that this is the end all. This is the beginning. Like we say, for initiation, one is called upon to become a human being by following these 4 regulative principles, and so also called regulative principles of freedom. And then when one gets initiated on this path, then they can endeavor to become a devotee of the Lord by the practice of the 9 processes of devotional service. Again, in sadhaka's stage, in the 9 processes, if you see, we have Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Vandanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atma, Nivedanam. So the first 6 I heard, I don't know the reference for this, but I heard like for sadhakas, while the other 3 are at a higher stage. So particularly like Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Pada Sevanam, Archanam, Vandanam. So Dasyam, Sakyam, and Atma Nivedanam is considered at a higher stage. But if you see Prabhupada integrated into the morning program, it is not like only the temple morning program. This program can be at our own homes individually as well. And if we follow that morning program, he has integrated all these aspects. Shravanam, Kirtanam, like we have this program, Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. It is helping us, practice one anga of the Navavida Bhakti in a consistent way. Like that, Prabhupada has integrated all the processes from what Prahlad Maharaj has mentioned in the Bhagavatam as the process of devotional service. So that is the process. I mentioned about the word process earlier. Process is Navavida Bhakti, and particularly the first 6 heard is at a sadhaka stage. So we need to, this is my just in terms of application, we need to always be, when we say practice bhakti, we hear practice bhakti nicely. What that means is we should be looking for ways to engage in these 9 processes, particularly the first 6, because it is like Shravanam, hearing, getting whenever we have opportunity, we need to hear, and Kirtanam, chanting, participating in Kirtan, Nagar Sankirtan, like that. Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, contemplating, remembering the Lord all through our day. So these are, and Pada Sevanam, like serving the devotees, serving all those things, aspects related to the Lord, like Tulsi Puja, all these I've heard is like can be considered Pada Sevanam because we are serving the devotees of the Supreme Lord. And then Archanam, Vandanam. So Archanam, again, we have our, worshipping the deities, worshipping any form of worshipping. If it's at home, if you don't have deities, worshipping the deity forms, and as photos, all those have the same result. So of course, one should try to move forward and take up deity worship. But I'm saying what I've heard is one gets the full benefit with done with the right consciousness. And Vandanam, of course, is integrated in our process. We see so many prayers right from morning Mangalarti prayers till the end of the morning, at least before Japa. So many prayers we say, from Shikshashtaka prayers to Narasimha prayers, then Tulsi prayers. So all through the day, if you see what Prabhupada instituted, it is we just following the process. And if you just do that, we see the benefits, we see the results. So that's what I know it's almost time, but these were some things. I had some more things, but some points I wanted to share from these two verses. I think I'll end here. If there's any discussions, questions, corrections, anybody wants to contribute, please do. Please forgive me if I've stated anything beyond my realizations. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thank you, Prabhuji, for wonderfully explaining the analogy of smearing the sandalwood on the body, how actually it means that we have to take the association of devotees and keep hearing from them, and also highlighting the importance of regulating the eating habits. So it may seem a very simple thing, but how disastrous it can lead to. Thank you for highlighting that. Devotees can unmute themselves to share any reflections, or if they have any questions, please ask Prabhuji. One question I have, probably this the starting of this chapter, I missed few parts, so might be I'm asking some. It could have been already repeated. Why is it that King Puranjana, who is so attached to his wife, leaves her? Is it just for hunting? The desire of hunting is so strong, or is there any other reason explained?
It is mentioned that it is because of his desire to hunt. He takes up his his weapons and goes. Now again, Prabhupada mentions in the purport that this tendency to like leave the queen is. If you go to verse 4, I think it was mentioned. I'm just referring to that. Wherever a king goes, he's supposed to accompanied by his queen. But when the king or conditioned soul becomes greatly overpowered by desire for sense gratification, he does not care for religious principles. Basically, due to disregard for religious principles, he ends up going to hunt. And then when, as I mentioned, after getting like how in our material one gets bashed up by material nature and gets tired and comes back. Now he's seeking the queen again, and that is one level of understanding. We're going back to Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada mentions. Many layers are there in this allegory, and personally also I found it was more careful reading and deeper study. I hope.
I think you rightly said there are many layers. I think it needs maybe a visualization of the entire pastime and the interconnections.
Particularly, I missed one important thing. Just a minute, I wanted to mention, like this whole aspect of the King Puranjana leaving and then coming back. It is like Prabhupada mentions in the purport that getting refreshed in mind. So it is compared to like one hears the scriptures, gets elevated and then falls down. So we talked about that fall down. Why that happens is that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur mentions in Madhurya Kadambini. I've heard in the lectures. I've not studied that book, but there is this in the process of bhakti, that is particularly in the 9 steps we mentioned, Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha Bhajana Kriya. In the Bhajana Kriya is all these practices of bhakti come in, and there is two aspects. That there is Anishtita Bhajana Kriya and Nishtita, steady and unsteady. And particularly when in unsteady state of devotional service, there is all these are mentioned in Madhura Kadambini. I felt it's very relevant for me as a sadhaka, and where I am struggling with this. Like the unsteady devotional service, we would have heard the Utsahamai, where false enthusiasm, momentary that doesn't stay, Gantharal, sporadic endeavor, Vyuda Vikalpa, basically indecisions, the mind, too much speculation of the mind, Vishaya Sangraha, so inability to give up sense enjoyment, Niyama Kshama, and particularly the last one, Taranga Rangini, I heard there was some connection made to this verse where one starts enjoying the facilities offered by bhakti, that is material gain, worship, position like puja, labh, pratishtha we hear. These are all weeds of the bhakti kripa. And here, that's also, it's at a higher stage in one gets tested in these ways through these weeds. And again, one falls down in the practice of bhakti. So I just wanted to mention that because here what happens is Prabhupada has mentioned, like given connection to one decorates themselves, but then if you see in today's verse, 13th verse, he says, instead of being elevated to higher consciousness, he became captivated by Cupid and was moved by a desire to find his wife. So that is 13th verse. So this is what happens. So after all these, we are tested where if we get carried away by the facilities offered by bhakti, like some you see some auspiciousness gets created, some material gain comes, we may get name, fame, position. So these weeds, so instead of elevating us further, we become captivated, and again we compromise and fall down. So that was one more point I wanted to bring out relevant to this translation, 13 verse 13.
Okay,
Sorry,
yeah,
I took more time.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? Any comments?
Maybe we can conclude. I think we are also over time. So
Yes,
thank you again for your time, Prabhuji, and your realizations and helping us understand these two words. We'll conclude with Vaishnava Pranams. Vancha kalpatarubhyascha kripa sindhubhye
Patitanam